Hello there, welcome, and thank you for joining us for another episode, unfortunately our final episode, of the Pride in Our City in Conversations series. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by the incredible Shash Appan. Shash is a computer programmer and renowned public speaker living in South Wales, whose talks often explore the intersections between race and gender. She's delivered talks for the likes of LGBT Cymru, Stonewall and Glitter Cymru, and spends much of her time running the mutual aid group Trans Aid Cymru, for which she is a founder member. Shash, thank you for speaking with me today. Welcome.
Thank you. Those accolades make me seem like I'm a very busy person.
I imagine you must be. Let's dive straight in. Let's talk a bit about Trans Aid Cymru, which is the mutual aid group you founded. How did that come about?
The origin story as it goes. We initially, there's always been transphobic media in the press, and it's been heightened recently and seems to be getting worse. But it was around about, I guess, almost a year and a bit ago now, where they leaked to the Sunday Times that they were going to shelve the GRA reform at the time, and we decided to hold a protest, just to get people together in front of Cardiff Castle. And we were, it wasn't necessarily like we were expecting the government to suddenly change or something like that. I mean, luckily they did technically walk it back a little, but it was more of a sense of we've been in lockdown for so long. This is finally some things have lifted up at that point, and we're this is a good time to have a sense of solidarity between everyone, because we hadn't seen a lot of our own community for I don't know, months, and it's been quite isolating. And so in the aftermath of that, we kind of, because that was organized overnight, the protest, and in the aftermath of that, some of the organizers, some of the people there, we decided that electoral politics is failing us, essentially. We've tried the methods that they've asked for, we've done their consultation, we campaigned for it, we got people to write in and pour their thoughts out and all that, but lots of labor for free, essentially, and it's kind of all gone to waste. And that hit hard for me, and it hit hard for quite a lot of people who were on that campaign. I mean, I wasn't even involved that much, but people in Stonewall and Sean, for example, who did this GRA campaign for a while, and then for it to be, it was kind of a kick in the teeth at the time. And in the aftermath of that, we decided, well, we've got anarchist roots, we believe in a form of anarchism, and we were like, well, we know that electoral politics isn't going to save us. What can we do to help our community now? And that's how Trans Aid Cymru was born. Initially, we just started redistributing funds from PayPal, which wasn't the safest or the best method of redistribution, but it worked. We were redistributing us quite a bit of money, and that was just through trust put into us. They needed to PayPal isn't exactly the most transparent platform, so there was trust. But then we moved to a platform called Open Collective, which allows us to be as transparent as possible. You can see where our funds go, how much funds we have, what we're using it for. So we're currently going through at the moment, people apply for grants at the beginning of every month. In the middle of the month we do. So we've gone from just redistributing on PayPal to, I guess, an organization where we redistribute funds, hold workshops and meetups and stuff like that, have a meal share program. We have, the way we work is we have this pot of funding, essentially, in the sense of, people have donated to us, but you can see how much we have, kind of thing. And if you're a trans person who has an idea that can help our community, and all you need is some help and some funding, that's something we can help with. Because at the end of the day, because a lot of the projects that kind of stop, because I think people always forget that the trans community, although we're trans, we have such a wide range of skills. I've had people come in contact who want to hold a music training workshop, so they can pass on their skills, and these things are professional skills that, you know, like if you really wanted to partake into like the capitalist system, you could put it on your CV and stuff like that, you know, like if you wanted to. But at the end of the day, it's not about it. It's about sharing our wealth of knowledge, sharing a sense of solidarity, creating community, and lifting ourselves up without the waiting for a seat at the table. And that's essentially it. And every day we're kind of always having to think of what can we do that elevates our community, makes our community feel a bit safer, happier, and more fulfilled during this like pretty terrifying times, really, you know. And it's going well. It's going well. We've, you know, like, people know us, I guess, and people are donating to us. We're redistributing funds on the regular. I mean, it is obviously like we're all unpaid. We do all this for free, and so it does take a lot of toll. And we're always looking for new volunteers. But you know, like it's great because it's also inspired other mutual aids to pop up too. Like ones in Edinburgh, Manchester, London, for example. And all focused on, like, say, helping trans people. And honestly, it's lovely to see that our community is not just, you know, like, we're not stuck in some way, you know. It's heartening.
Did you ever think when you were younger that this is something you might want to go into? I mean, you founded this incredible organisation, but you've said yourself, electoral government is failing this community. Was this born out of necessity, or is it something you envisioned yourself doing earlier on?
I think even before this, I had, like, you know, people who would ask me to speak at events and stuff like that, like, you know, like now, for example. I felt like, ironically, I wasn't a very gifted public speaker when I was younger. I struggled, but it turns out that if I have topics that I'm passionate about, I can speak well. And like, for me, like, it's not just, I guess, helping each other, and it's also kind of helping myself in some way, in the sense of, you know, like, I'm a brown trans woman of color. I'm a trans woman of color. You know, like, I'm not exactly, I'm disabled. I struggle a lot, and like, for me, this was a way of doing what I can to help my community, because I can't do it the traditional way. I can't do a 9-to-5 job. I can't do, you know, like, a typical 9-to-5 job, like, in the charity sector or whatever it may be, because unfortunately, my body, my life has not enabled me to. And for me, we started kind of, a large part of this is like, we started Trans Aid Cymru in the sense to catch those people who do fall through the cracks. And there's a lot of us. And I think people always forget that trans people are so marginalized in society that we've had, especially recently, the struggles with the housing, and it's like a housing crisis, essentially, people unable to be, and with Wales especially, the rents have gotten high, landlords are asking for like years worth of rent, guarantors, which are pretty unlikely for trans people who've had, you know, unsteady coming outs, you know, for example, you know, like, all these things are barriers that I faced, other trans people have faced, and I think even if we can't solve necessarily, like, straight away, at least we can pool our resources and find a solution. So a lot of the time, we try and work on links with other organizations like Acorn, who are a brilliant tenants union here, and they help with a lot of housing. And we do work specifically, we try to work as much as possible with grassroots organizations, because we do believe that they have the most involvement within their community, if that makes sense, you know, like, the idea of, like, actually knowing what's going on around them, and it's and we always get the, you know, the trope of out of touch politicians, but it does feel like it's more so when you don't see, you know, like, your politicians saying things to trans people or anything like that, you know. And so it's become kind of, we've made our own kind of little society within, if that makes sense. Like, and I think one of the things is like we decided that this Trans Aid Cymru is not, it's not bigger than me. It's bigger than, you know, like just the founders or whatnot. You know, like the aim is that there's always going to be something for the people, trans people of Wales, to fall back on if times get tough. And times have been very tough for a lot of people recently. And I think what's been surprising more than anything is how much we've been needed. And that's kind of led to the recognition. It's kind of a double-edged sword in ways. Like, it's great we're having all this name recognition, but at the same time, the reason we're having this name recognition is because people are using our service, and very vulnerable people are using our service, you know, people who have fallen through the cracks of the system, you know, like people who need full-time care and stuff like that. It is, some of the stories we hear are heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's wild how, like, for like £25, which is our usual grants in the beginning of the month. We do emergency grants, but these are the regular grants for any reason. No, you don't need like a trans particular reason or whatever. It's just if you need that £25 and you need it, we look at 10 grants at the month, beginning of the month, 10 grants in the middle, and you know, you get approved. And for that sometimes can be essentially life or death for some people, you know, like, you know, it could be, we had one come in, it was like, oh, I need to pay for my hormone prescriptions, or I need my gas come back on, or, you know, like, and it's, you know, typical mutual aid stuff, weirdly enough, you know, like, I'm not surprised, but it's just the sheer amount that we have to deal with, and sometimes the heartbreaking fact of, like, having to deny people grants, essentially, because we have too many applications or something. It's tough, and I do think, like, it was something I didn't expect coming into this kind of organization, or making this organization, having to, you know, make tough decisions in the sense of denying people because we don't have enough, you know. And the thing is, we try and always make sure that all these people aren't left behind in some way. There is some way we can support them, if there is. It's like, and if, for example, a lot of the time, the grants and stuff you don't see aren't exposed. Like, there's discretionary housing payments, council-related stuff, but all of those things aren't easily accessible. You know, they're not like, when you're in a crisis, you don't think, oh yeah, let me apply for a discretionary housing payment at the top of your head, unless you know about it previously. And so what a lot of the time we do is people email us in a crisis, and we try and help them, signpost them, and act as an advocate for them in a large, because they don't have the time. They don't have the time to process this. They don't have the spoons, essentially, to deal with the situation at hand. And that's why we're here. We're the extra spoon, as it were, you know, just to help out.
I suppose from my kind of end, learning about what you do, you have founded this incredible organisation. It's a mutual aid group. You're also an educator. You're a public speaker. I suppose from an outsider's point of view, it would be easy to label you with the activist term. Do you consider yourself an activist?
I don't know if I think it's kind of weirdly ironic that, like, some people that we call activists do the most benefit for their community, and I think that's kind of, I don't mind the term activist, but at the same time, some people think of it as a very, you know, keep behind the keyboard, they don't do any benefit to the community kind of thing, and it comes with that kind of stigma almost in, I guess, mainstream media, or what it means. And to be honest, like, if we're being, like, candid, I guess, I would consider myself a politician, just not in the electoral sense, you know? Just, like, what I am doing is politics. Like, I am what politicians should be doing, you know? Like, helping their community, getting involved, speaking for them. That's what I am essentially a politician representing my community, and that's how I see it at most part. And it's not because I've been elected or democratically or anything. It's just something that I've decided that I have the ability to speak about these things. I'm going to make a difference, and I think that is a more apt way to describe a wide range of people are called activists in my opinion, because like I think there's so many people disenfranchised, and especially within minority groups, the LGBTQ, black and brown, you know, like, and it's, the signs are everywhere, you know, like, people not being able to own their homes, even if they have a salaried job or anything like that, you know, like, people, like, climate crisis, the housing crisis, like there's crisis after crisis after crisis right now, the inflation, the minimum wage, there's so many things that have led to people being so disenfranchised with the people that represent them, the government and stuff like that, and for a lot of us have turned to other methods of trying to get help, and the thing is, with Social Security being cut as much as it is, and lots of like the increase in food bank usage and stuff like that, you know, it becomes very apparent that the system that we have is failing us very much, and that is the unfortunate reality, that trans people, especially as a marginalized group, are suffering a huge brunt of this, because the system is not only like forgetting about us, but I'd argue actively attacking us as a community, and whether that be, for example, anti-sex work laws or the police bills, where, you know, where things like there was an amendment which was withdrawn, thankfully, but, you know, like putting trans people in the wrong prison for kind of things, and it's kind of, and we're having talks of like, for example, recently, I believe, Labour, in spite of their transphobia and all that, had said that we need to do better for LGBTQ people. And their idea of doing better for LGBT people was longer sentences and harder hate crime laws. And that's not what trans people want. And that's what's so frustrating, because, like, they are not talking to trans people. It's so apparent. Because that doesn't make trans people safer. Trans people are still getting hate crimed in that situation. All you're doing is making the laws tougher. And, like, we're not talking about creating a more caring society, or, like, even, like, I'm not even saying, like, I mean, I'm an abolitionist. I'm not even saying, like, we should completely, like, they should be, you know, going steadfast into trying to abolishing prisons. And I know it's not that easy, and it's not, it's a very slow process, but the way they're going about it is so, it's always dealing with the trauma, you know, like, and there's no talk about preventing trans people becoming victims to hate crime, you know, like, and it's so insensitive when you realize that people within the big parties, you know, Rosie Duffield, you know, people like that who have been vocally transphobic, being put on TV, and then, for example, the BBC saying, look, she's not transphobic, she said she supports trans people, but then she follows up that sentence with dog whistles of trans women being male-bodied or whatnot, you know, like, it's so hard to feel like you're being represented, whether it be Westminster, Welsh Assembly, or the Scottish Parliament, or, you know, like, or, you know, it's so hard to see yourself, and so hard not to feel so doom and gloom about it all. And a lot of trans people, like, if you go on Twitter and you follow a bunch of trans people, a lot of them will be very depressed about, like, the whole situation. And I think one of the reasons we started, you know, Trans Aid Cymru is because of that. And we try and remember that we as a community have more strength in numbers, more power to us with our communicating to each other and stuff like that. You know, like, actually supporting each other. That although life just sucks, like around the UK, and we call it Turf Island, you know, that kind of thing. It At least we've got each other, and that's literally it. And it sounds so Christmas corny, but honestly, that's it, really, you know, like, and that solidarity goes a long way, not just within the trans community, but other marginalized groups too, you know, like with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think people always forget that it's not about necessarily like having to fight the oppressor all the time, and we're fighting the oppressor, as it were, by just trying to thrive in a more successful, and that upsets people. And that's what's so weird, because that's the thing, that these people are getting upset over trans people living their lives, and that is enough of an activist thing to do, to show that you're fighting the oppressor or whatever. So like, whenever like trans people say I want to do more, or like I want to help my community, and I'm saying like, the best thing you can do is not just survive but thrive, like in some way. And if you need our help to do that, that's what we're here for. And I think that's the thing. It's like, you got to give a big fu to, you know, like the people who are saying you can't do better, you're just a trans person or whatever, you know, like whatever denigrating term they want to use, you know, like it's just. And I think that goes a long way to helping people, you know, lift themselves up. And I think that's the most important thing, because I think what we've all collectively kind of realized is that cis people aren't going to save us in any time soon, you know, like we're going to have to do it. We can't rely on cis allies, we can't rely on cis organizations, we can't rely on, and it's kind of, we've been driven to a corner, and we've realized, whoa, this is a pretty large corner, there's a lot of people here, why don't we do something about it? And that's it, really. And I encourage, honestly, anyone who feels in a marginalized identity, feels that they are alone, reach out to others in your area, in your community, where it may. And even I'm not like saying like you need to start something, just hang out, honestly. Just strength in numbers goes a lot further than people realize. And I think people, and that's what most people are scared about, because we do take a lot, like we are a substantial amount of the population as marginalized identities, you know, like there is a lot more of us than it is of them, and we can support each other, and that scares them. And that's why, you know, this vocal minority of transphobes and other bigots, you know, just are so vocal about it, because they are scared about the issues that we've, like the solidarity that we're creating. And I think there's always that worry of like, I think because obviously post Brexit there's this huge kind of like move back to the culture war kind of thing, and trans people are at the front of this culture war. And I guess politically, like it's very much used as a tactic of the right to divide and disenfranchise working class people. And I think what they haven't realized is that trans people are working class too, you know, like, and we will, I mean, I wouldn't even say working class, to an arguably underclass as well, you know, like, and it's that kind of divisive rhetoric that is causing people to forget that solidarity is stronger than blaming a minority that has nothing to do with it, you know, like that's the thing. And it's very intentional, and it's very apparent that, like, so I do a lot of research. I'm a researcher for Trans Safety Network as well, and we do a lot of research on these transphobic groups, where their funding comes from, what kind of groups are out there, who they're linking to, and that kind of thing. And you know, through our research, we've discovered, like, you know, they are funded by organizations like the Heritage Foundation, Wolf, and who are all large transphobic like conservative think tanks, you know, like who have a lot of money, and they do fund these organizations. And you know, we have proof of like large anonymous funders, you know, going through to these transphobic, and that's what I say. It's all astroturfing, and that's what people need to realize. Like these transphobic organizations that are popping up for claiming they are fighting for women's rights or saving the children or whatnot, you know, it's the same rhetoric from back in the 80s that was used against gay people and other queer people, and it's just being recycled, you know. And I think that's in realizing that, like, it is a very, it's not the same stakes. It's not grassroots versus grassroots here. We are fighting essentially a very well-funded lobby of, you know, bigots and, you know, people who are platformed. And I think that's what's frustrating, because I'm here, you know, like I'm willing to speak on these issues, but you know who I don't get contacted by? I don't get contacted by the big press or anything like that, you know, like that, because I think they know I'd speak my mind, and that's partially an issue. Whereas, you know, you get people who have willingly resigned from their job over being transphobic, and then it goes on a media tour claiming, you know, I'm just trying to talk about these issues, and basically no one but a few giving them softball questions, you know, allowing them to just and they use, and I want to be like, the transphobes use the same tactics that white supremacists used, and that's such a big parallel that people, whether they don't want to see it or don't want to believe it, but people believe Nazis and white supremacists are like inherently evil because of the way we're raised, of like, you know, the Holocaust, and like there's this big glooming. But you gotta remember that these people, you know, how did they get there? You know, deconstructing, and the way they got there is people platforming these people, believing they can, you know, shine a light on these ideas. But the problem is they know they're going on TV, and they're going to tone down their ideas so they can speak to a larger audience. And it's a common tactic with white supremacists that transphobes have adopted. You know, that they will use coded language, softer terms. You know, they won't outright be transphobic on live on air, because, you know, that's something that can be easily exposed. But what they will say is something like, you know, think of the children, or like male-bodied or trans-identified male, like all these like coded dog whistles, because to create enough doubt, essentially, which will allow people to be radicalized into. And that's why I feel like there's always this thing of like, oh, let's debate them, or, you know, like try and take them down a peg. And I can't stress enough, it does not work. Debating transphobes is not going to save trans people. It's not going to help trans people, because at the end of the day, you're wasting your time. They get to spread their garbage to whoever's listening, and trans people are still affected by transphobia. And the best thing any ally, and I see this all the time, whether it's on Twitter or TV or whatever, like even mainstream videos where they have transphobes, or they're talking to transphobes or whatever, and they're all like getting into arguments, and it's a waste of time, because you are convincing no one but having people cheer on the other side. Like there is no, because I think people forget, like, transphobes, they hate trans people. Like, they inherently believe at the end of the day that trans people are less than, and that's the thing. Like there's no compromise here, in the sense of, oh, we need to protect women, trans people, or whatever. There's none, because I'm a trans woman. I'm a woman, you know, and that's the thing. They don't see that they don't accept we have autonomy. We have our own humanity, essentially. All they think of us is as a threat, whether that to be to the patriarchy, gender binary, whatever you want to be. But at the end of the day, trans people just want to exist and live their best life, and we are trying to do that. and there's always this call for like, oh, you need to talk to the other side and reach out, and it's like, why would I want to reach out to someone who actively doesn't want me to exist? You know, like, who in their right mind would go to someone and say like, hey, you believe that I shouldn't be able to pee, or I shouldn't be able to access public life, or go swimming, or, you know, like, go to the gym, because you think I'm a threat, even though I just want to exercise or do something, you know, like any other human being. Why is that? And then the crux of the reason is always transphobia. It's just pure transphobia. And I think that's what people forget, that these people, they don't have a compromise solution, because their aim is to make sure trans people are moved out of public life. And once they're moved out of public life, out of the, like, in every single one, so that's why they're attacking medical, you know, that's why there's such a huge push right now within transphobes to put a pause on this conversion therapy bill, because they are so worried that their conversion therapists who, you know, practice conversion therapy on trans people will be targeted because they are practicing conversion therapy at the end of the day. And one of the inherent things of things like that is that there is no, you can't ask someone, oh, if they tell you they're trans, and ask them to explore, like, oh, actually, wait a minute, why don't you try and do something? That's effectively denying yourself in order to try and pursue a goal which conforms more to society, you know, in some way, like cis heteronormative society conform, and it's that is conversion therapy, and that's what they're arguing should be legal. Putting someone in distress, forcing them to try and conform to a society that rejects them, that is harmful at the end of the day, and that's what should be banned, and that's what they're so scared of, because, and that's the thing, like, every time you see an argument for, like, against trans people, they're trying to pause, and it's so transparent once you realize that, like, they are targeting these bills that, you know, that are helpful to not just trans people, but all LGBT people, you know, like you know, they are trying to create loopholes in order to push us into a corner, essentially, you know, like, try and make sure that at least some of us are marginalized, or at least it can be used as a tool to prove their point, essentially, in some way, you know, like, and that's their hope. So, and that's what's terrifying, because they have had victories in the past in some way, you know, although we trans people have, you know, worked tooth and nail to try and fight against it, like the Tavistock ruling, you know, like, that was, and is still used to this, like, in America, here, internationally, through our research, it has been cited and used in the courts, in the papers, everything, as a reasoning to delay trans people care. And
for people that might not be aware of the Tavistock ruling, what is that about? Could you give us a bit of context to that?
Yeah, so the Tavistock ruling was essentially Tavistock versus Kira Bell. The ruling was that puberty blockers would be delayed, for essentially put on indefinite hold for trans people, unless they got, like, a court signed off on it, essentially. And luckily it was overruled, because that is an absolutely bonkers threshold for medical care, because that's what it is at the end of the day. Puberty blockers are medical care. It is not something that the courts should be involved in any way, because, you know, like, you and I don't get, like, go to the courts for when we need something dermatologically or something, you know, like, or skincare or something like that. It shouldn't be a necessary thing. And the frustration is the reason the case, you know, we were very confident that it would be overturned, was because at the end of the day, Kira Bell had so many opportunities to, you know, not go through with it, if that makes sense, you know, like, no one was forcing her, and I do want to be clear, like, it is so depressing that just because this one person feels like they didn't achieve whatever results or whatever they wanted, that they feel that every trans person who wants that for themselves should be denied the opportunity. And I honestly believe, like, the rate of desisting or detransition, whatever you want to call it, is so low. And within those people, the surveys and the evidence has shown that, you know, that these people, they're desisting because of transphobia. You know, like, most of the time they are desisting because their family doesn't accept them, or their life has become harder for whatever reason. And that just shows that, like, this problem that they're highlighting, they're trying to solve it with a solution that doesn't work. And that's what's depressing, because, like, the reality is there are people who have desisted and detransitioned who are struggling, and they are being used in a campaign to hurt other trans people. And it is disheartening because a lot of these people, I don't get me wrong, I know people who have desisted or considered not trans anymore, whatever the case may be, and, like, that is their choice, you know, like, I'm not going to, but I'm happy for them, because at the end of the day, what trans people want is not necessarily everyone to be trans or anything, is everyone to be comfortable exploring their gender in whatever way they please, you know? At the, like, there shouldn't be, and no one's saying, like, and they're saying the puberty blockers completely reversible, and, like, the studies show the side effects don't, you know, it is completely safe. That's the thing. This is what I'm trying to say. It's not just used for trans people, it's also used in cases of precocious puberty on cis people too as well. So it's not something that isn't studied or safe. It's not something that's experimental as people try to portray or whatever that it's case. It is safe, it is medical, like, it has gone through a lot of testing before it's used on kids, essentially. That's the thing. And it's what people are like, if you are saying that you don't trust the NHS to use puberty blockers on kids, that means you are saying you do not trust the NHS, because at the end of the day, like, it has gone through a rigorous process of testing. And, you know, like, it's frustrating because I think people always forget that being trans isn't necessarily about the medicalized transition. Yes, a lot of trans people do undergo HRT or surgery or whatever it may be, but the reality is that a lot of the time the methods we have available and aren't necessarily the methods people want, you know, like, especially for non-binary people, the current methods very much target, you know, people going from male to female or female to male, and, like, for trans people, that's such a arbitrary version of classification, you know, like, and a lot of the time you'll hear trans people who, you know, have more expressive gender identities try and basically pretend to be just a trans woman or just a trans man just to access healthcare, because they don't feel, and with evidence, it's not anecdotal, you know, like, the doctors will sometimes deny them care, you know, or delay their treatment because they'll say, like, well, you're just non-binary, that means, you know, like, you might change your mind or whatever. And it's like, at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter, because we're talking about bodily autonomy here, you know, like, this should be something that people should access. When it comes to kids, obviously, there's very much, like, you don't want anything permanent, but we are talking about things that aren't permanent, you know, like, and then when we're adults, like HRT, when you do get permanent implants, and that's when you get testosterone or estrogen or whatever, you are making that choice, and if you regret that choice, that's on you, you know, like, at the end of the day, you are making an informed choice, because that's of, I want to take estrogen or I want to take testosterone for these changes. It's saying it should be the same as getting a tattoo, essentially, you know, like, if you get a tattoo and you regret it, yes, it is technically reversible, but it's expensive and it's a process. The same thing with HRT in a sense, you know, like, it is, some of the things are reversible, but there will be some changes, you know, like, and I think that's what people, and like a lot of us feel like this way, that it should be something as easily accessible. It should be informed consent, you know. There's like, it should be just to be able to walk into your GP and say like, I want to start HRT, I know what the effects are, so well, your GP explains it to you, you know, and it's like, are you okay with this? And then it's like, whether you take a month to decide or whatever, that's up to you. But at the end of the day, I think cis people especially need to realize that trans people are more than capable of making their own healthcare decisions and do not need cis involvement in how to live their life, you know? And I think that's what's frustrating, because there's always people who are like trying to say like, you know, you know, it's well-meaning, but they're like, it's like, you know, there's so many checks and balances, and I'm like, I'm arguing to put less checks and balances for things, especially if you're an adult. But like, the reality is, for things like puberty blockers and kids, so few trans kids actually get puberty blockers. It's ridiculous, because not only do you realistically have to have, at the moment with the current overturning and stuff, you still have to have accepting parents realistically, you know, like, of accepting your trans, which is few and far between. You still have the waiting times of going through CAMS, which is already an arduous and underfunded and terrible process for every child involved in CAMS. There's horror stories throughout. Go through CAMS who say, oh, okay, you are mentally fit enough to be trans or whatever, and then they pass you on to Tavistock, and then you wait however many years. Through that process, you could have aged out. And a lot of people do. A lot of people just age out of it, and then end up being like, well, I've been asked invasive questions for over 10 years of my life, or something like that, and I've got nothing to show for it. And that is so depressing, because you would have worked hard to like try and make sure that, because, you know, there's social affirmation and stuff, like, you know, changing your name, pronouns and stuff, but you've jumped through so many hoops to access healthcare, which is effectively being denied to you because of time, you know, something that you can't control. And this isn't something that's just up to kids. It's like, there's the GIC in Northern Ireland, waiting list hasn't moved in 2 years. Like, they haven't seen people. You know, the waiting list in Exeter, they apologized for how bad it is, how little patients they've seen. And we know for a fact, and the excuse is always something like, you know, we're underfunded, or it's COVID, or something like that. And it's frustrating because, okay, how is that excuse helping me? And A, we know it's not because of COVID, because, for example, the Welsh Gender Service, they've gone on to see more patients than they did the year before. And they just started, you know, like, they've adapted to this circumstance and managed to carry on seeing patients. Like, the waiting list is still moving, you know, like, there is no necessary need for the services we have failing us, because all we're getting is excuses. And so at the end of the day, and that's what I think, like, Trans Aid Cymru and what I argue for, and like my personal beliefs, is that we have so much resources, you know, not just for trans people, but for people around the world, you know, like, we live essentially in a post-scarce society. We know this. We have so much food, we're throwing it away. We have so many empty houses, it makes no sense that we have people on the street, you know, like, it is mind-boggling that we are so willing to not treat each other as fellow human beings in some way. And for me, at the end of the day, I just want to make sure that people have a roof over their head, food on the table, and able to live their best life and easily accessible healthcare, you know, like, and that shouldn't be hard to ask for in a society where we have so much, you know, we have so much of, like, resources compared to other countries, and it's just so frustrating how much of a block it's been to get those things when it's so obvious the solution is. When the obvious solution is literally just talk to trans people. This isn't hard, you know, like, and I feel like, and I've been to, you know, I've been to places where they need a seat at the table. I've been to like stakeholder meetings and stuff like that where it's majority cis panel and stuff like that, and it's so frustrating seeing the face of someone who is gatekeeping a large amount of care for people, you know, and saying like, no, we can't do that, or trying to weasel their way around it. And it's frustrating because at the end of the day, I'm trying to do as much as I can for the community around me, and I am being blocked by a person who has no investment in it. You know?
So something
And
that is...
at the end of the day, I can't stress this enough. You can't have a society that takes care of everyone if you don't have people who represent that parts of society. So like, if you don't have trans people, if you don't have black and brown people, if you don't have people are always going to fall through the cracks. And this isn't something like that's identity politics or something like that, whatever on people. That's the reality. You are not going to be able to understand the lived experience of someone who lives this every second of life, you know, like I don't get to turn off my transness, you know, or turn off my brownness or my disability or anything like that, you know. Like, I know we say like, oh, put yourself in their shoes. You have the privilege to do that, and that is something that people don't like. The fact that you can put yourself in someone else's shoes shows that how far removed you are from that person, and that how there's a limitation to how much you can understand something that someone else experiences.
Something that strikes me with all of this is the emphasis on justification and trans people having to somehow make their lived experience valid in order to access basic services. I won't ask you about your own experiences of accessing these services, but something I admire about you is how candid you are when you deliver public speeches. Now, for people watching at home, Shash delivered a really incredible talk for Glitter Cymru back in 2018, which documented the cultural differences and the legal frameworks between growing up in India and the UK. That must have a toll on you, kind of delving into your backstory so candidly. Is there an emotional labour attached to that? And if so, how do you navigate it?
It's difficult because I think a lot of trans people, there's a very few trans people who had the privilege of like living a life without oppression anyway, because we live in an inherently cis society. So I think a lot of us face trauma in our lives. There is a reason that we have so much, you know, mental, the overlap in mental health, you know, there's a reason for that. It's because, you know, society rejects us, and a lot of the time our emotional labor is sometimes one of the few ways that we can get through to people, and if we're talking to cis people, that is. But I think for a lot of us, if we're exposing like our raw story, I guess, in some way, if we're talking to trans people, it's just to show a sense of solidarity, in the sense that like your experience of what you've been through, you are not alone in that kind of thing, and that can go a long way to help someone feel safe, essentially. And you see it a lot, you know, and a lot of much more prolific trans people than me probably face similar things, but where you get asked to talk about your trauma and stuff, and sometimes you do it because it pays the bills, you know, and that's the reality. You know, we live in a society where like sometimes our trauma makes money, and sometimes that's all it needs to be. And I think it's obviously different for everyone. For me personally, I think it helps me process things, helps me feel a bit more, I don't know, but like it's in my past in some way. And so, and like I've been through a lot, and I've talked about a lot of it in a sense. And you know, like that isn't that my kind of story has been, it always makes people's jaw drop, I guess, is the thing. And I think it's very useful in that sense, and you do use it intentionally to throw people off, because I think it's a useful, and that may be like me being weirdly manipulative in a conversation. But I think it's important to show that, like, for me, that, and a lot of trans people, we are very resilient in a sense, you know, like, and that's the thing, and we will take care of each other. And I'm lucky, and I still struggle, and I have to admit, like, I still struggle, you know, with my mental health, my, you know, like, I've attempted suicide before, and you know, and I don't think you'll meet a trans person who hasn't, you know, that's the thing. And it's like, that being such a shared experience within the community is so jarring when you tell people who may never even considered it, you know, like, it's never even come across their mind that I should take my own life for, you know, like, and that's kind of, it's kind of weird, because for us as like a community or whatever, it seems like we talk about this kind of stuff all the time, in the sense that it seems so desensitized to it in some way. Like, you know, like, oh, you thought about suicide before? Like, yeah, that's like me. And like, it's a bonding moment rather than like a moment of shock. But for when you talk to people who aren't trans, or who aren't in a marginalized community that suffers similar experiences, they are shocked, because they don't quite get how it could be that bad, you know, like how it could get that bad. And I think it's a weird mishmash of the bar is weirdly low in a way, collectively within the trans community, for feeling better about ourselves in some way, if that makes sense. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I can't speak to it. But all I know is that what we consider like emotional labor, I guess, in some way, is unfortunately just part and parcel of life for us. Like, that's like the unfortunate reality of, we are constantly having to go through things where we do talk about it. Whether that be healthcare or just people in general who want to know more about our lives. And like, that's the thing, like, our life is always, unfortunately, unless society changes in the near future, and I hope it does, but you know, unfortunately, that's the reality, that we are going to constantly have to expose ourselves, because that's just how our life is, our history, I guess, you know. Like, for me, my whole adult life has been, you know, tackling crisis after crisis, you know, like, it's not been, it's a strange thing to say to someone, like, you know, like, oh, you know, like, I've been homeless, or I've been on drugs, or, you know, or I've been done sex work, you know, all things I've done. And like, telling someone that, and like, and I'm only 25, it shocks someone, because like, how can you have been through so much when you're only 25? And I think people forget that, like, being in a marginalized community puts you in proximity with such difficulty, that sometimes turning to other methods to alleviate pain or make money or whatever it may be looks so much more appealing. And the thing is, like, I do want to. It's for every person, every trans person, especially with Trans Day. Remember, it's just gone past. For every trans person that's alive, there's a few more that didn't make it, you know, and for every trans person, it is just one bad day away from that kind of situation, and that's like the statistics show, you know, how bad it is, and it's a depressing reality, and I'm hoping that with, you know, Trans Aid Cymru and other organisations that we are making a difference in the sense of preventing that, you know, that because I don't want to lose a person of my family, essentially, you know, like, you know, I don't want to lose that, and that's truly something I fear, because it's hard knowing that a person has struggled so much in their life that there was a solution.
Thank you for being so open and honest. I think it's really important that people are able to hear your story. Unfortunately, we're nearly at the end of the time we have today, but Shash, I think it's clear that something has to change. Before we say goodbye, do you have any recommendations for resources people watching can turn to in terms of books or places to find further information?
Sean's book is very good, so The Transgender Issue by Sean Fay would highly recommend. And just, I don't know, follow, talk to trans people, like have trans people in your life, you know, and I think, and I want people to realize that, like, if you do have a trans family member or something like that, reach out and try and make them a part of your life. Try to learn more, actively learn more, like, you know, research, you know, listen to trans voices in particular. And I can't stress this enough, because, like, if you do search trans in Google or something, there is likelihood that you might encounter something transphobic. And, you know, just be careful with what you read, and make sure you're reading it from a trans person. But again, there's also a few trans people who, you know, take money from the other side, as it were, to, they've got their own, so they step on others. But there's less of them than there's more of us, essentially. So stuff from, like, if you're more into academic stuff, Julia Serrano is very good. Trans Safety Network, to plug my own stuff, Trans Safety Network has a bunch of resources. Trans Aid Cymru has a bunch of resources. Gendered Intelligence is a very good organisation. You know, like, Stonewall's a bigger organisation, but they have some decent resources. But I'd highly recommend trans-led organisations like Black Trans Collective, or, you know, Trans Aid Cymru, Gendered Intelligence, things like where they have trans people at the helm, trans people speaking, trans people in control. They are going to be your best source of information, your best source of understanding and forming, you know, bonds of community. And I think I do think there is a place for cis people, do not get me wrong. Like, my partner is cis. She helps with Trans Aid Cymru a lot. We couldn't do it without her. But she knows that, like, and I think, to me, she should be someone that all cis people look up to, but I may be biased. But it's understanding that you are, and it's weird to say this, but, like, second fiddle in a way, because, like, your primary focus, if you really, really want to be an ally, and I mean this, like, it has to be a verb, your primary focus should be protecting trans people from harm. So if you are engaging in debates or anything like that, where you're actively, like, trying to debate transphobes or fight transphobes or something, you are doing something wrong, because you are wasting your time where you could spend better part of your energy and resources helping trans people, passing on skills, or platforming trans people specifically. So, and I think if you have, I think, like, if someone asks you to talk about trans people, and you don't decide at that time, as a cis person, if that is, at that time, that you should look for a trans person, you've done something wrong, you know? And I think that's the main thing. You should be always referring to trans people when you are talking about trans people. And similar with people black and brown issues, you know, disabled issues. This isn't. It sounds wild and revolutionary, but like, it's you don't have to do everything on your own, if that makes sense. There's no, and I want to be initial, like, I'm no hero, you know, I don't know everything, you know, and a lot of trans people, we are specialized in different things, you know, like, for example, like, I do a lot of tech stuff, it's, you know, like, that's my wheelhouse, but, like, at the same time, it's very much like, if you want an expert on something trans, do not look to a cis person, because you're not going to find it. You're just not. Because the reality is that society has accommodated them. They're never going to experience the trials and tribulations, as it were.
Shash Appan, thank you.